Today, I'm headed to meet McKenna Akane, an award-winning STEM teacher and Frontier Learning Lab ambassador who has pioneered the use of emerging technology, including virtual reality and conversational AI. From her early days in Alberton School District, McKenna has earned national recognition, including Discovery Education's Educator of the Year award, and her class were state winners in the prestigious Samsung Solve for Tomorrow competition. If you've ever wondered how to move beyond basic AI tools to design award-winning VR projects or how to tackle equity and cultural responsiveness when bringing new tech into underserved communities, you're in the right place. Thank you so much for joining us here on Kinwise Conversations, McKenna. For listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you share a little bit about what brought you from being this first-year STEM teacher in rural Montana to designing award-winning AI and VR experiences to your current role as at the Frontier Learning Lab at the Montana Digital Academy? What keeps you motivated day to day?
I did start working at a very rural school in Montana, and Montana is comprised of mostly rural schools. We do have urban schools, but it is far outnumbered by the rural schools because of how large our state is. The journey from a first year STEM teacher in rural Montana showed me a lot about how a rural school has a very different budgeting and infrastructure than a larger school district. And so, what brought me from a first year STEM teacher in rural Montana to designing award winning AI and VR experiences? Well, in my first year, I noticed how, I guess I should preface, I really wanted to include virtual reality as a extension and an engagement piece to my lessons. And so what I did, being in a small school, is I fundraised money for 4 MetaQuest 2 headsets, which at the time were the new and the best. I wanted to use it to extend opportunities for learning to students who were higher achieving, but at the same time, to allow students to be immersed in what they're learning. That started the ball with being recognized in emerging technologies across the state and actually across the nation. And then finally, with the last 6 months, the ITSD Top 20 to Watch award recipient. And that's because I decided to not only include emerging technologies, but try to implement a course where students are creating with emerging technologies. So keeping them more active in the process of using it ethically, using it in a responsible way, in a culturally appropriate way. I think that initiative that I took is what really brought a lot of attention to the classroom that I was in and the students' work that they were doing. And so to be able to win recognitions personally and for my class, I think at this point I have 5 recognitions. 2 are national, 1 is international, and 2 is within the state.
I know that you also had your students in the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow competition and you were the state winners. And so I'm curious about how did that come into being? What was that like? What did your students do? Yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about that experience.
Absolutely. Samsung has a Samsung Solve for Tomorrow competition each year. It is a national competition. Many schools participate in that. And the idea of it is that you create something using emerging technologies to solve a problem in your community. And so my middle school students, 6th through 8th grade, in our VR content creation, wanted to help spread awareness of the culture in rural and indigenous communities. And the work that they did was very impressive. And to the extent that they were able to compete against and beat high school students from across the state in larger districts and to hold their own with their project. And they were named, our class was named the state winner for Montana. So that was a huge achievement for them. Being in a rural school, sometimes those aren't offered, those experiences of competing for something at such a high level. And so I do think that's worth noting that when you introduce these emerging technologies and students know that what they're working on has a purpose, it does benefit student outcome. And I'm so proud of those students for being able to place as highly as they did.
And I think it shows that when you are kind of on the front of an emerging technology, you can have your students engage in opportunities that they wouldn't have access to otherwise because there's just a smaller pool when something's emerging. And so if you're at the beginning of that, you can really open up a whole world for the kids in your classroom. I also taught, and as a first year teacher, you have a lot on your plate. And
Yep.
so I'm really curious about what gave you the drive or the determination or the inspiration to be able to kind of fundraise and bring this new technology into your classroom because anyone who's listening who is a teacher and remembers their first year, it's not easy. And so doing that in that moment where you're navigating so much newness and change is really impressive. How did you do that?
That when I first decided I was going to fundraise for just 4 headsets to enrich curriculum, not replace it, and to show students an emerging technology in an educational way, I saw a lot of student engagement, retention, and students who don't typically participate starting to show a lot more engagement and participations in lessons. And so when I first saw that, I thought, our rural school deserves to have these emerging technologies just as much as any other school. And so my personal interest in emerging technologies combined with what I saw in the classroom made me think we can take this even a step further at Alberton. In doing so, I fundraised what was at the time class VR headsets. That allowed me to do was get a learning management system in and a larger set of headsets so that I could start implementing that more and even starting my own self created virtual reality creation class. And so that combined a lot of what I was teaching in my other courses, computer science, computer animated design, things such as that, where I could combine those skills students have already learned and introduce them to virtual reality in a sense where they had ownership of what they were making. They were very proud in what they were doing. So they were actively learning, and me as a teacher, I was trying to help guide them and help them to understand the uses of AI and virtual reality to create a project that was meant to educate others. So they're creating essentially an educational virtual reality experience. So that's kind of the motivation I had was seeing the success in students and in the classroom and seeing that my own personal interest and drive was helping them to further their education, but also to provide them opportunities to be ready for an ever evolving future workforce. Something that I think both AI, especially, and virtual reality will be prominent in.
It's really cool because it sounds like you were really using emerging technology to solve problems in this project-based learning way where they were able to take the wealth of skills that they had learned and then apply those for something that's practical and useful. I think there's so much more pride when you do a project than there is when you take a multiple choice test. And so being able to create that in your students, it sounds like you had a classroom culture that was really empowered, innovative, engaging, and this technology was really an enabler for you to do that.
Yeah, it was. Seeing the engagement and the success and interest of students just fueled my personal passion in emerging technologies. So it was a win win. And I saw the potential for that.
That's amazing. And I think about, do you know this SAMR model for technology? That's like when we use technologies, the substitution, and at the bottom, is that redefinition level where you're really transforming how students learn because of the technology?
No, I like the pie chart model because it includes both educators and students.
Oh, nice.
So it's saying the same thing. It's just including like, how does this affect the student and how does this affect the teacher? And how are we implementing it in a way where we're getting the best for both educators and students when implementing emerging technologies?
Yeah, that's great. And really thinking about, I think what's cool about your story with the VR headsets is there's so many examples of tech coming into classrooms and it just being the same old thing that we've always done, but now we have a computer, or now we have a tablet, or now we have a VR headset. But you really thought about how do you transform the learning experience so that you're able to use the technology to magnify what's possible while still assessing those core skills that students need to have.
Absolutely.
So I know you've mentioned Alberton, which the Alberton School District. And so I'm curious about any opportunities or constraints that you had while you were there. I feel like we've touched on this a little, but just want to give you a chance to think through that a bit more.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Alberton School District is a very rural community. The students at the school make up half the population of the town. And so, being there in any rural or small school, there's always budget constraints, right? And so, to be able to know that that's something that I'm going to have to do on my own because of the limited budget motivated me to look for grants for community funding. So, community businesses that wanted to pitch in and see this virtual reality course, virtual reality implementation continue at the school level. While the budget was a constraint, being in a rural community, one of the good things about it was being able to reach out to the community, to to people who really saw the value of it and wanted to contribute to that project. Because there are a lot of options for rural schools to find grants or fundraising opportunities because it's known that those schools have budgetary constraints and that there is an unfair access to technology there. Experimenting with what I did, I saw benefits and constraints with being in a rural school.
Yeah, I really love that you highlight the community aspect of working in a rural district. I think it's so easy to see certain types of school districts from a deficit mindset and to say, like, you're in this rural district, you have all of these constraints, but there are benefits to a rural district. I think sometimes you can move faster because there's just less district barriers. I think district policy, district departments, they can move faster. You have this community that is close knit, and maybe the school is more central to the way the community operates. Whereas in a very large area, there's lots of places where communities gather. And so I think just highlighting that, I feel like there are probably people who work in rural districts who feel like technology might seem like this might not seem accessible. And your example shows that, there's some benefits actually to being in a rural space.
There are. There's definitely constraints, but there's benefits. Like you said, if I need something approved, I can walk downstairs and talk to the superintendent face to face. So there's definitely benefits as much as constraints, but I like to focus on the benefits. So
Yeah. I think that's really cool. And just we all know that there are constraints in a rural district, but it's nice to highlight the things that are positive. I want to move into some of the technology that you've worked with. You've really explored immersive video and conversational AI with Galaxy XR and Gemini. And I'm wondering about any aha moments that you've had when you realized AI could really allow learners to have an interactive experience.
yeah. So being in a rural district, I was able to fundraise headsets and VRs and eventually even VR sets that had their own learning management system within it, which really is what transformed that virtual reality to something that I could manage and keep students accountable for. And I'm sure we'll get to that later in some later topics. But as far as Galaxy, I love that. I love the mixing of augmented virtual reality and the ability to use AI conversationally within that. I see the benefits a lot, and I've been keeping up on that. And some of the aha moments I have and wanting to be able to implement that in schools, especially in my current role, is that what separates that from just traditional XR virtual reality and conversational AI is that that's combined. So there are opportunities for you to get headsets that allow you to put them on and look around a room and say, for a practical sense, where are my car keys? And it can actually find that and tell you, oh, they're on the coffee table by notebooks, right? Or in an educational setting, if I have a student who is watching an immersive video and has a question, using that conversational AI, they can say, I didn't really understand what that was. Will you give me more context on that? And it will actually be able to see what you're seeing and hearing and give you conversational input on that. And so it really does give students almost a direct answer for clarification and deeper understanding. So I see a lot of potential in that in schools as affordability costs kind of complement that to be able to implement for a lot of reasons. To, in my mind, I see it helping a teacher to be able to provide different interventions and accommodations to students who want to participate but may have to need a little bit of assistance with explanation and deeper understanding. And that's something that conversational AI is able to provide, while I can also at the same time work and manage with the other students in the classroom.
So, McKenna, when I was teaching, I taught sixth grade ELA and I did not have virtual reality headsets. I think my nephew has one, so I have worn one time. But talking, as a person who taught English, but don't have a lot of experience or any experience using VR for an educational experience, how could I imagine making this kind of technology useful in my sixth grade ELA English class?
That's a great question. And I'm going to touch a little bit on my current role, which is the Montana Digital Academy, which is a statewide online school that provides a wide variety of options for students, schools. I'm going to focus on the Frontier Learning Lab right now because what we want to do is offer AI help with an AI help desk, professional developments, but also virtual reality. And so if an English teacher were to say, hey, and you said you taught sixth grade?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, I, I want to have some sort of extension for learning that would allow students to have experience in a VR headset that directly relates back to what I'm teaching. And so there's options for that. I'll take an example of I did teach ancient civilizations for a while, which you wouldn't normally think, let's go ahead and add emerging technology into this. What I did is I thought we've finished our unit. We are about to test. I want students to have the very brief use of virtual reality headsets to help extend that learning and provide them an immersive experience where they're not just listening, writing notes, they're able to actually be in a place and experience it virtually. And so when I was teaching ancient civilizations for Rome, I did find a free resource of a tour of Rome, and it's a tour of Rome back in the prosperous times of Rome. So not current day, but it would actually take you back to that point in time. And students' connection to what we spoke about in curriculum drastically increased when they were wearing the headsets and they're like, oh, I see the Colosseum. This is what they did. Being able to implement it, even in a very small circumstance, I think gives that engagement and that wow effect to students. You'll find that being able to experience that even virtually firsthand, their understanding, their retention, their ability to connect curriculum to that experience, it just deepens their learning. And that was one of the initial times, actually, in that example that I said, virtual reality has a lot more potential in education than it currently does. And now we are seeing a rise of virtual reality being offered in an educational setting.
I think the example you gave of ancient Greece, it makes me think about when students approach a text, they're able to comprehend much more of the information if they have some background understanding. And so you can read something
Yes.
more complicated if you know about the topic. And so I could imagine you could really push your students to read a grade level above if they are able to walk around ancient Rome and have an understanding of what that looks like, then they could engage more deeply with a text that might be inaccessible to them otherwise. And so as you were telling that story, I was like, "Oh, you could use it like this or like this." So I think whenever you can making something tangible like that was really helpful for me. I know there are VR is a pretty high tech tool that not everyone has access to. But there are a lot of lower barrier to access AI tools that do exist. And so, as you've done work with the Frontier Learning Lab and supported educators with AI, what have been tools that you've introduced colleagues to or educators to that are easier to access?
So, I mean, without actually mentioning platforms, because I think the platform depends directly on what district you're in, what's in that tech stack. I think looking for AI tools that support student authorship. So, ones where students are accountable for being able to author their own work, but with the use of AI in a sense that you're using it more as a write and check or a almost like a tutor to be able to help you to better your own student authorship. Because what everyone I think is afraid of is that our student and I'm not disagreeing with this, is that our students are using AI perhaps unethically to do their homework, to write their essays. And there are platforms that help us to keep teachers and students on the same page and accountable. But what I believe is if we can allow students to use AI in a responsible manner, in an ethical manner, their understanding of AI and how it works increases as well.
Do you have tips for educators on how to start doing that?
How to start implementing AI?
Yeah, like in a responsible, like you said, if we allow students to use AI in a responsible manner, in an ethical manner, they're gonna figure this out. I have talked with a lot of teachers who haven't really used AI at all yet, and so there is this push and this tension between what if my students are cheating and using it in this unethical way that disrupts the processes that I've built and how I understand myself as an educator. And then at the same time, this technology is important to understand. And so as I know that you're doing some work with educators through especially through your new role, how do you start?
How would I help an educator who has questions about AI and how
Mhm.
to implement it because they're novice, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would be happy to introduce from the Frontier Learning Lab at MTDA is essentially what the Frontier Learning Lab is a statewide initiative to help educators. However, we do have a platform called the AI Help Desk, and that is meant for educators primarily in the state. That is who we would prioritize for an answer, but really anybody in the nation who says, like your example, I'm afraid of students cheating. That's where I would suggest people to go to ask those questions and to get a response from MTDA and the Frontier Learning Lab, where we have vetted platforms. We have help with prompting. We can direct you in areas if you're worried about student cheating to be able to make sure that not just that you're trying to check if a student is teaching, but to be able to have that conversation of ethical use, responsible use, and keep them accountable by almost an agreement between educators and students on what is allowed within AI. What questions should we be asking and how? Kind of circling back to prompting, right? We don't want to just say, here, classroom, here's AI, use it ethically. You want to show them how it can be used unethically, which is why I said an important tool is any one that promotes student authorship, right? And so that's where I would direct people to go to because right now our AI help desk is the first of its kind in the nation. And as much as we want to help Montana educators, we want to help anyone in education. So if you have a question about AI use from novice to proficient, I would suggest you send it there because the whole goal is that we are able to help educators feel confident in being able to implement AI, be it in mini lessons, be it in assignments, so that the students know what their responsibilities are, what's ethical and what's not. The teacher has identified the proper ways in what they would let you use AI wise, and so it becomes more of a group effort of educator and students to come to this agreement and hold each other responsible so that, again, our students aren't using it in an unethical manner. They're using it as a way so that they can have AI tutoring. They can have AI options where their work is put at the forefront and AI is there to merely add suggestion or to give examples of where context could use improvement.
As you were talking about building these norms and agreements between educators and students, it just reminded me that educators have been doing this forever of thinking about what are we going to agree to as a class and then working together to make sure that students are on the same page as their teachers. And so even though AI is an emerging technology that presents a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges, there's still these base level things that people already know how to do, like have conversations about how to use tech, how we're going to use this thing that's in front of us, whether it's, how are we going to use this Play-Doh today to how are we going to use AI? There's this norming and this clarity that doesn't solve everything, but it at least gives you a leg up. And so I appreciate you naming that and, pointing out that there is this AI help desk that can provide more specific and differentiated answers than maybe like the broad stroke that you're going to paint in a podcast answer.
And I really do encourage educators anywhere. And if any Montana educators are listening, try it out. There's from the most basic of question to anything complex, like we're here to help you so that you feel confident in implementing it in your classroom and you feel confident that your students will be able to get something tangible from that.
Awesome. I want to ask you about equity because this has come up a lot in what you've shared. And I think Montana is such an interesting state because there's just a lot of space in Montana, which means, your rural areas can be a little bit disconnected from a major hub. And so you navigated that as an educator and are now leading the way in Montana, in a state that has a lot of diversity and some really rural areas. And so I'm wondering about access gaps now that this played out in your classroom as you got these VR headsets, but now you're having this more state focus and national focus. And so how are you thinking about access gaps in your new role and in this more systems oriented role?
Yeah. The goal of the Frontier Learning Lab is to be able to provide our different options for professional development, the AI help desk, different opportunities specifically with VR. That's something I have a passion for in addition to AI, is that our rural towns in our indigenous communities and those schools, they often see the biggest struggle and access to quality internet or access to recent developments or newer models in technology that their school is using. The point of the Frontier Learning Lab is to meet schools where they're at and help them to find solutions to all of that.
Mhm.
Specifically with the VR, XR implementation of that, we want to be able to provide schools with that technology so that they can get a classroom kit and, let's use me as an example as a resource to connect with and say, hey, I want to do this project in my classroom and I want to be able to utilize the Frontier Learning Lab to get those emerging technologies like headsets and different platforms to use. But I'm going to need a little bit of help. And so to be able to provide that help to educators so that they have the confidence that they know what they're doing and that they have a resource to rely on so that their vision is really put into play. It plays out the way that they were hoping for it to. So to be able to provide headsets to them so they don't have to worry about all that goes behind grants and
Mhm.
fundraising so that they can try their hand at it and see its implementation and all the good that comes from that, from student learning. And I would even argue teachers, I personally, I got really excited about the technology. It made me want to learn more and how it can apply to education. And so just getting our foot in the door and saying, hey, we're here for you to provide you these materials and guide you step by step through your process if you need that is hopefully going to allow schools to see the benefit in these emerging technologies, be it AI or extended reality, and then to be able to help them to either implement that within their school and find them resources to fundraise those technologies, or just to frequently check in and see if they can use our technology in different subject areas across the entire school. So, being able to spread the word and have educators experience firsthand its impact, and then letting everyone in the state know we're here to help you, whether you're at ground zero or you have some information but you need guidance. That's what we're here for.
That's awesome. I think sometimes when you do something for the first time, it can be helpful to learn from people's experiences and not just what went well, but if you had any challenges. I think we learn really well from the struggles that other people may have encountered. And so I'm curious, when you go back to your first experiences implementing VR and AI in your classroom, did you have any missteps that you would avoid if you could do it all over again?
I do have, knowing now the capabilities of extended reality in education and AI in education, I do look back and wish I could have done things a little different, but the technology wasn't there at that point. Taking it back to what I said earlier, fundraising on my own for VR headsets to be able to use as an extension of learning and something to help them immerse themselves in content. What those headsets didn't have was a learning management system. And from my first year implementing that in the classroom, I did fundraise more to be able to get education based headsets so that I'm able to supervise what students are doing. I can see what they're seeing through their headsets. I can assign specific modules for them to work through. Whereas in my first year, I was working with MetaQuest 2. And although I had educational offerings on there, it was hard for me to know sometimes if a student was actually working on what I was asking them to work on. And so to be able to have those learning management systems early on, I think I would have been able to implement it a lot more within my classroom. But even in just 2 years, the amount of education based AI and virtual extended reality has progressed so fast that some of those issues I experienced are being fixed by different organizations because they know what teachers need. And so the technology is progressing, the professional development and the ability to ask somebody like the Frontier Learning Lab for advice and guidance on how to move through with a project. So the technology is there and it's ever expanding. What teachers, I believe, administrators, even anyone who works in a school, is that professional development and that ability to rely on a help desk to be able to ask questions for clarification.
That's a great point, and it sounds like a lot of the challenges you faced were these technical issues of not having some aspect of the technology needed, and I think anybody who saw it has been scrappy at some point and figured out how to make it work, but it can be hard when the technology doesn't quite meet the needs that you have, and so I'm sure as you're supporting educators, you're able to make sure that they have a learning management system and whatever virtual reality tool that they're choosing to use.
And that's a blessing from working in a rural school is I do understand your issues, the connectivity issues with internet or just the issues with being able to acquire these technologies. And so what we're here for is to be able to say we hear where you need help and we're here to help. And as you move through this project, we're here for you to rely on for questions and advice moving forward. Specifically with AI, there's a rise in schools saying, All right, we need to help our students and help our faculty to better understand the ethical, responsible, and safe way of using these technologies." What the Frontier Learning Lab's goal is that we're here as an asset and as a resource. And our goal is that the students in Montana are able to have the exact same access to emerging technologies that larger urban schools in the state have.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable and purposeful mission that you and the Frontier Learning Lab share. So I'm excited about the work that you're doing and the access that you're making sure your students have access to. I'm curious because AI is evolving a lot and it's becoming more prominent in schools and classrooms and workplaces. And so I'm curious about the role that ethics and cultural responsiveness play in these classroom deployments, especially when you may be working with Indigenous or other underrepresented communities.
Yeah. So the ethical implementation is a responsibility of educators to understand and to be able to teach students that just like plagiarism, there are ways you can unethically use art or augmented intelligence. So to be able to have educators understand the way that they should be delivering and introducing students to the ethical and safe responsible use of AI in the classroom is the forefront for students understanding that they are still the owner of their work. And so they need to have student authorship at the forefront of that. We can use these tools effectively and we can use them ethically. And here's how. In response to cultural responsiveness, I like to also just know that AI is not an embodiment, it's not an embodied entity. And so, though it can speak to the information that it finds, what it's not doing is taking what a human can do and have perceived to have lived experiences where they embody different perspectives and have that play in. Because if we're using AI is using it's a language model, right? So if you're using AI and you're asking it a question about a culture, what it's getting is information and the responses you get may not actually be accurate to that culture. And so to be very aware of the fact that what you're using as a tool doesn't have the same capabilities you as a human do. It can't tell you what it hasn't experienced. What it's telling you is what it's able to find off of the web. And so to be able to be culturally respectful and responsible, you really do need to include those in that culture who are able to add context and add input and saying, this isn't totally accurate, or this is the way that this culture perceives this, and this is how we would like it represented. Because, and I'll use the indigenous communities. I can't speak to those experiences that they have. I can't speak to that culture. And I can use AI, but I have to keep in mind that what AI is giving me also can't speak to those cultures. So, speaking to an individual who has actually lived those experiences and been in that culture, you need to make sure that what you're working on is actually accurate and respectful to that community.
It's a good reminder that machines and artificial technology and augmented technology can all help us build things and build our understanding, but there's some information, person to person, human to human, that is important and incredibly valuable. And when we think about bias and training data, for instance, that exists. And one way to combat that is to be present with the communities that are being represented by the technology. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that. I'm sure that is working with so many school districts in Montana. I'm sure that's very top of mind for you as Montana has many
Absolutely.
indigenous communities.
And they're all very different with different cultures, languages, stories to tell. And so you need to be very mindful of the fact that those are the individuals who should be choosing how to display their culture, how to represent it. And we can teach them how to use these emerging technologies, but letting them know that you are the person who's lived this life, who has those experience, who has the perspective. So ultimately, you are the person who is able to say whether or not what you're receiving is bias. And that's I don't want to necessarily blame the emerging technology. It's just the way that it works. And so knowing that it's a tool that's helpful, but in any course, in any subject, you do need to take what you've gotten from AI and even AI image platforms and be able to fact check that that is actually correct and relevant and unbiased. So again, and as you've mentioned too, in your projects, is that it's human first. You're using a tool, it's human first, and ultimately your responsibility as that human is to be able to make sure what you're getting is factual, it's culturally respectful, and that it's something that you can put out and use knowing that you cross off all of the different factors that go into creating something that is ethical, factual, respectful.
That's such a helpful and healthy thing for us to remember as we engage with new technology. I'm wondering, as you work with different educators throughout the state and the nation, how do you, if you, I don't know, if you could look 5 years into the future and imagine what it might be, how do you envision STEM classrooms leveraging AI to foster creativity, critical thinking, collaboration? What do you hope for the classrooms in 2030?
So, what I hope for 5 years down the line is that our educators become more open to the idea of implementing those emerging technologies. I was eager to introduce my students to emerging technologies, something that would put them in a place where they're ready for the workforce of tomorrow. What I hope for is that educators are open to the idea and that by using the resources that we offer at the Frontier Learning Lab, they're able to gain that confidence that they know what they're doing to be able to provide that to their students. And that if ever there's a point where they need clarification or they need suggestions on platforms, that we're here to help with that as well.
I also hope that their openness, because the technology exists whether we acknowledge it or not, and it doesn't nothing goes away that you ignore. And so I see AI and emerging technology as an imperative for educators to be aware of and comfortable around, because students are always students have been using emerging technologies that they have access to for as long as they've had access. And so it's important to have safe adults to guide and talk with. So I totally on the same page there. My last question for you. It's the last question I ask to everyone on my podcast, an idea or question that is really sitting with you. It might spark hope, concern, curiosity. This could be the question that keeps you up at night. And I'm wondering what that is for you.
Yeah. So, my biggest concern and worry is that with how frequently and rapidly these emerging technologies continue to develop, that our educators, our administrators are able to feel comfortable in also keeping up with that. I do worry that, you know, if these technologies are advancing so quickly, are our educators, administrators, anyone who works in a school, are they comfortable with being able to keep up with that improvement? Which, as it sparks concern, but also curiosity. And the hope that I get from that is that they utilize, and this is my state specifically, but like I mentioned before, the Frontier Learning Lab with their AI help desk is able to offer that to educators anywhere as long as their question is AI education related, that they're able to lean on us as a support. If you do not feel like you are keeping up or if it is overwhelming, ask us. From the most basic to the most advanced questions, what we're here to do is make sure that you feel confident that you are keeping up and that you are able to introduce that into the classroom and that we are always here to help. These technologies, they're not going away. They are going to be prevalent in the workforce of tomorrow, and I think educators should feel that it's overwhelming, but to know that there is a place where you can lean on so that you're able to make your workload as a teacher to prevent burnout, that you're able to focus more on how you deliver to students, how you're preparing students. So being able to realize, yes, it advances quickly, but there are resources out there like the Frontier Learning Lab and the AI Help Desk that want to make sure that you feel confident that you understand how to use those advancing technologies in an ethical and responsible, safe way within your classroom.
Well, McKenna, it's really cool that you are actively trying to combat the thing that worries you. So
Yes.
I really appreciate you sharing your story and letting folks know about resources like the AI Help Desk. That's a wrap on our inspiring conversation with McKenna. She is a true VR visionary and STEM innovator, and we thank her so much for sharing her on the ground insights. We have a few takeaways from our discussion. First, technology should serve the community, not the other way around. McKenna's VR project shows how AI can be used not only for novelty, but to preserve a community's culture, language, and heritage with deep respect. Second, we can look beyond automation to interaction. McKenna's experiences with conversational AI and immersive video show us the potential for truly dynamic learning experiences. And finally, equity must be designed from the start. Addressing access gaps, devices, connectivity, and digital skills is a non negotiable for ensuring these powerful new tools benefit all students. To learn more about McKenna's work, check out the links to the Frontier Learning Lab and her award winning project in today's show's notes at kinwise.org/podcast. And if your own school or district is ready to build a community for ethical and effective AI, Kinwise offers everything from educator PD pilots to leadership labs that help you draft board-ready guidelines. Details and bookings are at kinwise.org/pilot. And finally, if you found value in this podcast, the best way to support the show is to subscribe, leave a quick review, or share the episode with a friend. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay Kinwise.